We just want to have a normal conversation. If you don't have the education befitting an elite, you're the one who will struggle in the future. You shouldn't waste your time either. After all, we live in different worlds. My daughter is set to marry into a family of lawyers. We went to her fiancé's family home for the first time to introduce ourselves and meet his parents. But the moment they found out I was a single father, they started looking down on us. Her fiancé immediately defended us, but his parents just smirked and dismissed us. Then, does she have a profession that matches our elite status? Hearing that, I couldn't help but laugh at how petty their concerns were. Then you have nothing to worry about. I'm sure you'll enjoy talking to her. She's a judge. What? My name is Mike. My wife passed away early, and I've been living with my daughter, Emily, for many years. When she was young, I often left her with her grandmother while I worked late. She is very patient and rarely complains. Even though she must have felt lonely, she never demanded much and always cared for me. Losing her mother at a young age forced her to grow up faster than her peers. I know I've put her through a lot. But she has worked hard from an early age and managed to get the job she always wanted after graduating from college. During her college years, she started dating a guy and finally decided to marry him. His name is Chris Smith, the same age as Emily. Chris, whom Emily introduced to me, is currently working as a medical resident, aspiring to become a doctor. His goal is to be a doctor who never gives up on any patient, no matter their condition. He seemed like a sincere, humble, and kind young man, just as Emily had described. When it came to marriage, we had to meet his parents. But when this topic came up, he looked a bit uneasy. Well, my parents are quite conservative and have old-fashioned views. Chris's family has been a lineage of lawyers for generations. Naturally, his parents expected him to follow in their footsteps, but Chris chose to become a doctor instead. Initially, his parents weren't pleased with his decision. They consider it almost a family business, so they weren't happy with my choice. But they eventually accepted it, thinking being a doctor would also be respectable. When I heard this, I thought about how different families have different values, even to the point of restricting their children's future. Given his parents' busy schedules, our marriage introduction would also serve as a family meeting. I felt a bit nervous about whether I would get along with his parents. Chris hadn't been able to tell his parents much, only saying he had someone he wanted them to meet. We adjusted our schedules to match theirs for the marriage introduction, which also served as a meeting between both families. We decided that we would visit the Smiths' home. The day finally came, and in a suit, I stood with my nervous daughter in front of Chris's family home. As expected from a family of lawyers, their house was grand, well-maintained, and seemed to have historical value. With a housekeeper managing the place, Chris and his mother, Megan, welcomed us. We walked down a long hallway to a spacious parlor where his father, Robert, was waiting with a dignified expression. He invited us to sit down. The conversation started with small talk about the weather, eventually moving to family matters. Megan asked hesitantly, "So, where's your mother? Couldn't she make it today?" At that, Emily and I exchanged glances. Seeing our reaction, Megan and Robert looked puzzled. Chris looked down with a somber expression. "Her mother passed away a long time ago. It was a car accident." "Oh, so it's just the two of you?" Megan quickly followed up, while Robert turned his head away and muttered, "A single parent." "It must have been tough without a mother," Megan said, trying to sound sympathetic. This was a phrase I'd heard many times, each time tinged with different emotions depending on who said it. The same words, depending on who says them, can carry a mix of emotions. When you hear such words repeatedly, you start to understand all too well what they truly mean based on who is speaking. To this couple, it didn't sound like they were offering any sympathy. Given my job, where listening to others is crucial, I quickly picked up on the underlying tone of their words. "So, you must have struggled financially and rarely had the chance to spend time with your daughter. The world is made up of a mix of values." Despite my discomfort, I maintained a calm exterior. Yes, her grandmother took care of her in my stead. Thanks to her, my daughter learned to cook delicious meals. "That's very heartwarming," he said, but his tone was detached and uninterested. "Did you choose not to remarry for your daughter's sake?" Their questions felt like an interrogation directed at me for being a single parent. They didn't direct a single word to Emily. I've been busy with work. Then it must have been even lonelier without a mother. Children need their mother's love, you know. But my grandmother had a lively personality and gave me a lot of love. She told me many stories about my mother. So I was fine even without many memories of her. Emily spoke up, and I quickly supported her. Also, my daughter went to college on a scholarship. As I continued, Robert raised his hand to stop me. That's enough. Your daughter is quite remarkable. You've raised her well despite being a single parent. Robert summed us up, and Megan nodded in agreement. But our family has been running a law firm for generations. We need someone to join our practice, Megan said, as if it were an obvious duty. She was subtly indicating that Emily wasn't suitable to join the Smith family. Chris stood up, unable to take any more. But his parents turned their criticism towards their own son. Chris, you bear responsibility too. You chose to become a doctor instead of following the family path. If you're getting married, your wife should help with the family business. Marriage isn't a game. I understood they were busy. Hence the difficulty in scheduling this meeting. But instead of celebrating their son's engagement, they were criticizing Emily. To them, a suitable partner was someone who fit their criteria, more like an employee than family. I've had enough of this disrespect towards Emily and her father. This is my marriage, Chris said. It's also a family matter. You can't just do as you please. Don't be conceited. From then on, Robert continued to blame his son unilaterally for not following his wishes. He kept repeating the usual arguments about their prestigious family lineage and the constant public scrutiny that prevented them from doing as they pleased. To me, it seemed they were overly concerned with their public image. Chris's parents sought someone who was unquestionably suitable, someone who would earn respect and admiration from those around them. They judged her by their stringent standards and found her lacking. I felt sorry for her, who remained silent and endured their criticism. She had looked forward to this day more than anyone. The Smiths believed they had the right to choose their son's partner and turned their criticism back to us. She can't even keep up with our conversation. Even with a college degree, she's still third-rate. And you left her upbringing to others. Balancing work and child-rearing would be impossible for her. Robert declared that one should carefully choose a lifelong partner. Otherwise, it's disrespectful to them. Don't waste your time, we live in different worlds. If both agree, everything goes smoothly. You know we don't, right? Megan said, her eyes suggesting we back down. But Chris was furious. You don't know anything about Emily. She's my college classmate and worked hard to get a respectable job. Robert dismissed Chris's argument lightly and feigned exaggerated admiration with a playful "Oh, really? She must have a job that rivals ours, then? We just want to have a normal conversation. So, if you lack the education befitting an elite, she'll be the one struggling. We wouldn't want people to think we're bullying our daughter-in-law." I couldn't help but laugh at their petty concerns. Then you have nothing to worry about. Especially with you two, the conversation will be lively. Emily is a judge. What? The Smiths were stunned by my unexpected statement. Seizing the silence, I started talking about my late wife. It was just after I started our consulting firm. My wife died in an accident caused by another driver's negligence. Emily was 4 years old at the time. She says her memories of her mother are still vague. My wife was not only my beloved partner but also my strongest ally in our business, so her loss was a massive blow. The person responsible for the accident came from a wealthy and elite family, much like the Smiths. They initially tried to settle the matter quietly with a large sum of money. But the driver showed no remorse. His apologies were hollow, like reciting memorized lines without any genuine feeling. Naturally, I couldn't forgive him and refused the settlement, deciding to take the case to court. When he realized we wouldn't settle, he switched to a defiant stance, backed by a top-notch lawyer. "Let's see who wins in court," he said, as if enjoying a game. We won the case. But the outcome wasn't entirely satisfying. After he was imprisoned, I received a letter that seemed to be a scripted apology, lacking any real remorse. The handwriting appeared to be his, but the contents seemed entirely unoriginal. A string of copied words without any true remorse is meaningless. I immediately burned the letter. Throughout the trial, they accused me of being greedy, aiming to increase the compensation. But the settlement only covered the high legal costs and the debts I had incurred. What I sought wasn't money but a sincere apology and acknowledgement of his wrongdoing. No amount of money could bring back my irreplaceable wife. A shallow apology serves no one. After his release, the driver caused another major accident, ending his short life. This case was widely reported, so the Smiths, as lawyers, should be aware of its significance. Emily, though young, attended the trial with me and cheered when the verdict was announced, shouting, "Mom, we did it!" In the quiet courtroom, the fact that it was the victim's young child who spoke allowed it to be forgiven, and she was not asked to leave. Judges are supposed to remain neutral and conduct fair trials. Therefore, they rarely let personal feelings influence their words. They fear that excessive emotion could cast doubt on the impartiality of their rulings. However, the presiding judge seemed to appreciate Emily's diligent attendance and concluded the trial by addressing her directly. In your long life ahead, you may feel the loss of someone important. But please stay strong. This experience likely solidified Emily's determination to become a judge. We visited her mother's grave in the rain to report the verdict. As we prayed, Emily whispered, "Mom, we did it." And then told me firmly, "Dad, I want to become a judge. Rather, I will become one." From then on, Emily studied hard, consistently aiming to become a judge. She attended college on a scholarship and pursued law without hesitation. Chris, aiming to be a doctor, supported her through the demanding study hours. Emily took the challenging route through law school, where only 30% passed the bar exam. After 3 years of rigorous training, she finally became a judge. Listening to my story, the Smiths fell silent. Then Chris began speaking to his parents. He too had his own personal grievances with his parents. "You became like this because you took on those family court cases during tough times, didn't you?" When the Smiths took over the law firm from Chris's grandfather, a brilliant lawyer, they upheld the principle of helping the weak. However, they often lost these cases. Naturally, no one wanted to hire a lawyer who consistently lost. In a pinch, they were referred to family court cases that had been passed around. These were really cases that no one else wanted, but they took them to build a winning record. What they encountered were the grim realities of impoverished families. Parents who used their children because of poverty, or manipulated them for their own desires. Most of these were single-parent families. Children raised by single parents often became single parents themselves, repeating the hardships their parents endured. Despite the abuse, children still longed for their parents' love, even knowing the cycle would repeat. The idealistic justice of the Smiths, who grew up in a sheltered environment, was useless against the harsh realities faced by these families. But as they took on more cases, they turned around their business again. Gradually, they started to hold prejudices against single parents and their children, who they saw as destined to repeat the same mistakes. In the end, no matter how many times they tried to help, the mistakes kept repeating. They came to believe that the reason people repeated the same mistakes was because they were foolish, unable to learn from their environment, education, or experiences. That's why I didn't want to become a lawyer like you two. I always felt like I was being persuaded into it, and I knew it wasn't for me. Robert started to say something but stopped. He hadn't realized their attitudes were the reason Chris chose a different path. Megan, unable to hold back her tears, spoke out. "No matter how much we tried to help, those people kept making the same mistakes. It's impossible not to have bias toward them. You call yourselves elite, but the man who killed my wife came from an elite family too. It may be true that there is some influence of education and family. But being a single parent doesn't doom everyone to the same fate. Does being elite excuse everything? Do you have a get-out-of-jail-free card? Does being elite mean you can hit someone with your car and escape responsibility?" My anger stemmed from seeing the Smiths' elitist attitude, which reminded me of the man who killed my wife. No one has the right to be above the law. As I finished, Emily gently urged me to sit down. After a pause, Chris spoke to his parents quietly. "I respect you most for never giving up on your clients, even when you were constantly losing. You need to change too." The Smiths, usually so articulate, had no response. It's true I was lonely after losing my mother, Emily said hesitantly, and the Smiths listened intently. But my father and grandmother gave me so much love. I know I'm very lucky. Having said this, Emily smiled serenely, like a pure-hearted saint. It was a clear, unclouded smile that only someone who has known true, unwavering love could have. The Smiths must have realized that their elitist thoughts were actually prejudices. They had no rebuttal for Emily. Now you understand. Emily and Mike are honorable people. Being elite doesn't matter. I'm marrying Emily. Emily shed tears of joy at Chris's declaration. I'm sorry, Emily. I knew this would happen, which is why I dreaded today. But I wanted you to know everything, including my parents. Chris suggested ending the meeting and walked us to the door. I'm sorry for everything you had to see today. It's okay. It was a good opportunity. I'm proud to see how well my daughter has grown. We reassured Chris, who bowed his head in apology and left feeling lighter. Emily and Chris got married a year later. As they wished, the ceremony was small and intimate. Seeing Emily in her wedding dress, I caught a glimpse of my late wife. Even the Smiths, who had been so strict, were in tears as the couple exchanged vows. However, perhaps still feeling awkward about the previous meeting, they made a brief greeting after the wedding and quickly left. Afterward, we had a fun gathering at my daughter's new home with close friends. The casual potluck style made it feel out of place for the Smiths, so they might have felt uncomfortable regardless. Time passed, and about 6 months later, I received a call from Emily. Since her marriage, I've been living alone, and she occasionally invites me over for meals with her and Chris. This time, she said the Smiths wanted to join us. I had no reason to refuse, so I agreed. On the day, I dressed in a casual jacket to make a good impression and arrived at my daughter's house on time. The Smiths were already there, and upon seeing me, they stood up. Good to see you again. Oh, hello. It's been a while since the wedding. With that, the conversation fell into an awkward silence. We wanted to apologize to you before we eat. The Smiths bowed their heads, apologizing for their rudeness during the previous meeting. We're deeply sorry for the disrespectful comments we made. We caused you and Emily a lot of discomfort. Their apology felt almost like a formal press conference. It seemed Emily's simple statement, "I am happy," had completely overturned their prejudices. They now understood the hardships Emily faced to become a judge and respected her for it. They also began to notice the unconscious prejudices and casual remarks of the people around them. Realizing they had been like that themselves, they were shocked. They decided to move away from unnecessary grandeur, considering semi-retirement and downsizing their law firm. This change brought some pleasant news. Some of the children we helped in family court have pursued careers in law. They now work as our assistants. Megan added, "What we did wasn't in vain. It took time, but we finally understood the right path." She turned to Chris, "We owe you an apology too. We forced our selfish expectations on you." He smiled gently and replied, "I see that you have become what I used to respect these days. That's enough for me." She helped us see the light. "And Mike, we wanted to thank you for raising such a wonderful daughter." The once elitist Smiths now exuded a refined yet gentle demeanor, free from the intimidating air they once had. Having stepped away from a competitive environment, they seemed more relaxed and at ease. "Shall we start dinner?" Emily suggested. What followed was a meal filled with warm conversation. This dinner sparked ongoing interactions between our families through our daughter and her husband. And now we even coordinate our schedules for trips together. The Smiths also expressed their desire to join us for the first time in visiting my late wife's grave. As a united family, they prayed at her grave, wishing her peace. It was a clear spring day with a gentle breeze. Knowing that a new family member would join us next year, our family, centered around Emily and Chris, would become even more lively. From a distance, please keep watching over us. I conveyed this to my late wife at her grave, then returned to my new family.